Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Welcome to this special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and Ken is taking a well-earned break. My guest today is Dr Liz Nicholl, Qualifications Development Manager at CPCAB, and we're going to take a deep dive into CPCAB's latest qualification, the Level 5 Diploma in Therapeutic Counselling. We're going to unpack what this qualification really means for the profession, how it aligns with the Scope Ed Column B, and what it signals for the future of counselling practice in the UK. So Liz Nicholl, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, this qualification, how does this qualification align with the professional membership routes such as BACP and NCPS accreditation?
So the qualification itself, our Psychotherapeutic Counselling Level 5 Diploma, has been in existence for some years, but what we decided to do earlier this year is do a full review, and then we've revamped it, we've relaunched it. And as part of that review, we looked at the competencies in Scoped Column B. So BACP accreditation and NCPS accredited professional registration have always been available to our graduates of both Level 4 in Therapeutic Counselling and the Level 5 Diploma in Psychotherapeutic Counselling. And that's because the skills, knowledge and practice embedded in those qualifications has always met the standards required for those membership levels. However, those professional membership routes have now been aligned with Scoped Column B. And so actually we realised that there were some aspects of the Level 5 Diploma that didn't meet those competencies. And so we undertook some work earlier this year to ensure that we've mapped it to those competencies and to the training requirements of Column B. So there will be further practice requirements, but that was always the case, that when people were going for accreditation, that they would have to gain a number of clinical hours after qualifying. But actually what we've ensured is that when candidates apply for those membership categories, they're going to be able to evidence that in undertaking both our Level 4 and our Level 5, they have met all the competencies that kind of meet Scoped Column B. It should make it a fairly easy process for them.
Yes, and if you're listening to this and thinking, well, what is Scope Ed and what is this Column B and what's are Rory and Liz talking about? I think I would direct you to your professional bodies. Have a look on your professional body website, be it the BACP or the NCPS or the Association of Christian Counsellors, which I believe also fits under Scope Ed, and just get yourself a little clued into what this is and what change this has brought to the profession. I don't think we can talk too much about Scope Ed in the time we have together, because we are talking about the qualification. One question that I have is, this qualification, am I right in thinking, is a step from Level 4? So someone who do a Level 4, or as they say in Scotland, a diploma, because obviously in Scotland their qualification route's slightly different, and then they would move into this Level 5, as we're going to talk about it today, as a bridge between, I guess, working as a student counsellor and working as a independent practitioner. Am I right in that?
Yes, that's correct. So what we have really kind of embedded in the Level 5 Diploma are the knowledge, skills and competencies that are needed to work autonomously, that's in independent or private practice, or as a senior counsellor in an agency. So when learners qualify as counsellors, say after their level 4 diploma, they've had on the whole experiences of working in a supported and contained context in agencies. But working as an independent practitioner means taking on responsibility for ethical decision making, as well as the practicalities of running their own business, for example. So what we feel is important is to really encourage independent thinking, the ability to make appropriate professional judgments and kind of ethical decision making as a key part of the course.
Yes, and I think what's becoming clear is that hopefully those who've undertaken their level 4 in an agency, they will have had clients who've been triaged. In other words, they will have probably gone through someone a bit more senior, a bit more experienced, and they would have been given clients to the level of their training competence. I know for those people who might be sending letters in saying that wasn't my experience, I understand that, but that's the general philosophy. That's what should happen in a well-managed practice, in my humble opinion. And once people leave that kind of safe harbour of having someone oversee their work, make it, and basically someone you can go to just to say and ask questions, you're really on your own. And it is a very isolating, it can be quite an isolating profession if you're working as an independent practitioner. So, you know, having some understanding of working in private practice as a sole clinician, I think is really important. And what skills do you think that the qualification brings that helps prepare counsellors, shall we say, to work more safely in more complex environments?
I mean, I think the skills needed are, you know, being able to make sound decisions, both ethically and professionally. And actually, what underlies that is the ability to take responsibility for those decisions, and to be able to think them through and to say, I've made that decision for this reason, and it's in the best interests of my client. And I think we also need to think about client and therapist or counsellor safety. It's not just the client, the counsellor needs to ensure that they remain safe in the relationship too. So I think, you know, another skill is to be able to recognise where there might be something happening in the relationship where they need to think through the most appropriate interventions, and also recognise when they need to seek help. So I think supervision is absolutely vital in that. So I think there are a lot of layers to that independent work and independent thinking, in also being able to, you know, have the humility to at some point say, I need help here. And, you know, in my experience, I think it was just quite daunting to be responsible for creating my own policies, for contracting with clients and being responsible for that contract and making judgment calls in risk situations. I think, you know, it's a big leap to step out of that haven and to realise that actually there is no manager or kind of agency policy to turn to for guidance and support.
Yes. And I think that you've hit on two very important points. One is accountability, where we are accountable for our work and how we're accountable within the decision-making, you know, what decision-making we make. And I know that ethical bodies, certainly the BACP, have put a lot of focus on ethical decision making and looking at the draft as it is at the moment, and we're recording this in the October of 2026 for those future listeners. The new draft ethical framework certainly points to a more taking more responsibility and more ownership and becoming more competent through ethical decision making. I think that's really important, and it's really important when we're working with clients who may be discussing ending their lives or serious self-harm. Certainly a topic that comes up for colleagues who may be working privately with children. I used to see a lot of that as a school counsellor. So do you think that this qualification, or how do you think this qualification prepares practitioners for that safety piece, if you like, working safely?
Okay, so obviously, we place a strong emphasis on working within ethical, legal, and professional frameworks. And that deepens at level 5. It's really important to kind of embed and deepen the ethical competence. Because in independent practice and kind of taking on a position of responsibility in an agency, for example, the complexity of issues that clients bring is firstly unpredictable, but also it's more likely, you haven't got that triage system when you're in independent practice. You work with whoever comes to you. So in order for those clients to have their needs best met, it really is very important to have that deeper ethical understanding and ability to work with issues. So in level 5, we encourage now candidates to be really alert, to be able to recognize the complex thoughts, feelings, and behaviors around suicide and self-harm. And that's one of the major changes we made to level 5 this year, because that aligns specifically with one of the column B competences. And although it was implicit in the level 5 previously, it wasn't explicitly expressed. So it's absolutely vital that practitioners are able to manage risks such as these sensitively and appropriately. One of the most important things we do is signpost tutors and learners to the NICE guideline NG 225. It provides recommendations for therapists working with self-harm and suicide risk. And their recommendations include working collaboratively with the person to take their views into account. So that requires a degree of skill in a potentially emotive and distressing circumstance. And it's very important, again, to work within current guidelines, because those guidelines are for best practice in this environment. And we always recommend that in such situations, therapists always find the support of their supervisor. That's vital.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one observation I made when I went from working in a number of kind of agencies, although in the latter part of my career, I worked independently for an agency. Managing and working with clients who may be thinking of taking their own life was something that I spent a lot of time in supervision with and a lot of time collaborating with colleagues, because there was no one else. I couldn't wander into my practice and say, oh, this has happened. I'll speak with the practice manager. There wasn't. I was the practice manager, so to speak. And it was quite a steep learning curve. So I'm really glad that piece is in this qualification. As I'm very pleased that there's a real focus on diversity, inclusion and accessibility. And not that it really needs explaining, but I think it's a question as a host I should ask. Why is it important to embed cultural humility and awareness of barriers at this level of training?
So the ability to work with client diversity is paramount. And so, we expect independent practitioners, again, to be able to employ their critical thinking skills around how to work with client diversity. We try to provide guidance. So we currently provide guidance and signposting to a range of resources that counsellors can use. And again, at level 5, we're expecting that research to encourage independent thinking, to understand why cultural humility is so important. And ultimately, it again is about meeting the client's needs, kind of providing the best possible therapeutic environment in which somebody can flourish, regardless of their cultural, social, biological diversity. So, for example, the range of resources that we signpost to are the Race is Complicated Toolkit, the Black, African and Asian Therapy Network, but also we find the Churchill framework that can encourage candidates to explore areas of diversity such as faith. Really, really helpful. And again, at level 5, what candidates are encouraged to do is to consider how these might impact the relationship. It's important at any level to understand how to work with diversity, with humility, but with competence as well. And that's because of the potential complexity of the work. I think what's also key at this level is that the counsellor models how to work in this way, particularly if they're working as a senior counsellor in an agency. So there will be trainees who will learn through seeing how the more senior therapists around them work.
Absolutely, and I think that's an important point, because a lot of people think that, or maybe even I think that, you take a qualification, it is something for self, but actually, the better qualified you are, the more that it impacts on those around you in your conversations with peers or for those who work with you. And I think historically modelling best practice has always been something that therapists have done and had in their conversations. Can you give me an example of how this might be, this cultural humility and awareness of barriers may present itself in the assessment criteria? What would a candidate have to evidence to say that they'd understood what was needed and could work in this way?
Okay, that's actually a really good question. As part of the review of this qualification, we ended up changing the wording of some of the assessment criteria because we took on feedback from our centres who said that some of the criteria that we had originally were overlapping or a bit confusing and didn't help candidates understand what it was that they needed to evidence. So we took the time to review the wording in a way that hopefully now encourages candidates to explore and research diversity issues, and most importantly, apply their findings and personal experience to their client work. And this is done across a range of criteria in our third learning outcome. So we encourage our candidates to reflect at depth on how diversity issues might impact the counselling relationship and to take into account, as I said, the social, cultural and biological factors that might be at play. But we also expect that clients will evaluate their own practice to determine how they might unwittingly be putting barriers in place and to consider how to remove these barriers.
It's really important. And just to be clear, social and cultural, I think, are well understood. When we talk about biological diversity, can you give me some examples of what biological diversity may be?
I can give you a really simple example from my own practice.
Oh, yes, please.
So my therapy room is up a flight of stairs, and there is no access for people with kind of limited mobility. Or, I have a client who has a heart condition and she really struggles to get up the stairs. And we're reaching a point now where we're having to consider, how do we move forward? She really benefits from face-to-face work. So is there another space I can find to work from? Or do we alternate online and face-to-face work, and she comes to see me when she's physically able to do so? So hopefully that's an example that will help highlight what biological diversity is.
I think that's a great example, and something that practitioners need to be aware of. And of course, a lot of people do have hidden disabilities as well, which could be the quality of the chair that someone sits in.
Absolutely.
Or do they sit at all? Some clients may struggle sitting for the therapeutic time. So all these things are really, really important. One of the things that I've noticed through my arc of being involved in therapy is that there's more focus now, or there is a clear focus on assessment and formulation skills. Now, that's all. Formulation skills have always been a part of cognitive behavioural therapy, as far as I know. But nowadays, use of tools in clinical settings is really important. So, how would candidates be introduced and use tools to help formulate or understand clients' presentations maybe more clearly? I'm thinking of Core 10 or PHQ-9, that type of thing. Yeah.
I think it's something that candidates actually come across quite early on in their counselling career. As soon as they go into placement, if they're in an agency, even in those non-clinical settings, client assessment, it's firstly, a key first step, but will often involve those outcome measures. And I think once candidates get to level 5, where they may be more familiar with those outcome measures and the forms that are used, and could find it quite tricky to fit them in with their own modality, what we're encouraging at this level is to really think about, why are they being used? Is it simply a function that needs to be fulfilled for the agency to continue gain funding? Is it because they actually want to measure progress? And I think what's really helpful is if somebody's able to kind of think through, okay, why are we using these tools? How can they be used relationally? Because there is an association of outcome measures and kind of the tools that are used that does sit with cognitive behavioural therapy. And that I think there's always been traditionally a feeling around different, maybe humanistic modalities, that this doesn't fit. But actually, if they're viewed in a way that actually, it's important that we understand what's happening, to get a snapshot of what's happening for the client in that moment, it can inform the assessment. But I think there's further work that can then be done at this qualification level to help candidates think about how they help the client set the agenda for the work ahead, how they can help the client express their needs and hopes for therapy, whilst still having to use these tools if they have to. I think also part of the training on level 5 allows candidates the opportunity to conduct their own assessments. Tutors can provide opportunities to explore different forms of assessment and to practice them in the classroom, so that when counsellors go into private practice, if they choose to use outcome measures, they understand how that fits with their modality, how they might actually introduce them in a way that still, they're feeling that they're allowing the client autonomy and choice, and that it's used in a way that, you know, encourages the client to think about their current situation and what they want to gain from therapy, it can be really valuable. As a senior counsellor in an agency where maybe it's a requirement that these outcome measures are used, again, it's important actually for that thinking around client need and choice to be fostered and encouraged.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've supervised quite a few students during my career as a supervisor, and I can't tell you how many have been asked to do assessments without any oversight of what they're for and how they're in service of the client. And there was a sense that they were a case of, well, we just need to get this funding paperwork out of the way. That's what they would say to the, you know, this is for the funding, exactly. Nothing to do with therapy really. And I just need to do this and tick, tick, tick. And of course, what happens in a case like that is that it's not in service of the client, because the research of these tools, which will come on to the research piece, it shows that they have really good outcomes for clients if they're used correctly. And also, I think that if they're not filled in properly, then they're of no use when you're coming to do any kind of research into the effectiveness of your agency. So it pays to have people who are delivering these, understanding the duality of it. Yes, it might be for funding, but also really it's in service of the client. And I would say, the humanistic tradition tends to forget, if I may be so bold, that Rogers et al. Were very keen on assessment. They spent a lot of time on tape recorders and Q-sort tests and all that type of thing. So there was always assessment in humanistic therapies. Just seems to have faded a little bit. And now, with a more accountable world we live in, where we're more accountable as practitioners, I think that this kind of assessment is really important because it's developed through research. And I guess that brings me to my next question, research. I recently had a conversation with someone and said, why do I have to do research? I'm a counsellor, I'm not a researcher. And it's like, yeah, but things change, right? and that's embedded into the qualification, that idea of people becoming their own researchers. Tell us a little bit about that.
So yes, that's something that we actually begin at level 4, because it's so vital for counsellors to understand that, research informs our practice. That if it wasn't for researchers across a number of institutions, further and higher education institutions, looking into the practice of counselling, why we do what we do, what works for clients, what doesn't, what supports therapists, the profession would never evolve. We'd never understand fully why we do what we do. And I think that's a really important thing about research, that it helps us move our practice forward. It helps us understand therapist and client factors in a variety of areas. And certainly with my own candidates, what I would do is we would have a couple of sessions where they would choose a journal article. So, a peer-reviewed journal article to look at, to read, and then they would present to the class why they'd chosen that article. What was it about them that prompted them to find that particular topic interesting? Was it something in their personal interests? Was it something that was coming up in their practice at the time? To present a summary to their classmates, and then most importantly, talk about what they'd learned from it and the ongoing impact that it would have on their practice. So it was a kind of, research in action, really. And I think fundamentally, research underpins everything we do. And at level 5, what we're trying to encourage is that ability to think critically about the research and maybe even be inspired to conduct their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to get back on my favourite hobby horse, Carl Rogers, and the things that people believe he didn't do, he was a hard-nosed clinical researcher. If you look at the things that he did, he was a researcher. He was interested in research. And I saw a wonderful LinkedIn post that said, question asked by someone, why are there so many more neurodivergent people? Where have they all come from? And someone said, well, in the same way that we can see more stars now we have a telescope. we research has underpinned this. We now know things we didn't know before. And I think that curiosity that we have in our practices when we're working with our clients is something that we need to amplify into our wider kind of professional formation. And think what's next? What are my clients telling me? What do I need to find out? Where do I need to go to get that information? And it's built into level 5, which is a joy, really, isn't it? Because research makes us smarter, hopefully.
Exactly. And I think at CPCAB in general, we really promote research, not just in our qualifications, but in what we do as well. So, we're starting to get actively involved in research into various areas around kind of, learning, collaborative learning, and just what's helpful for counselling tutors and candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think of my training 20 years ago, the people who did it were wonderful, but they were 20th century trainers talking about 20th century therapy. And we're in the 21st century and we know so much more. I'm sure, for those listening in the humanistic tradition, Rogers would have been absolutely fascinated in things like polyvagal theory. He would have been incredibly interested in things like the discussions on diversity, and I think he would have been terribly excited. So I think in his tradition, just to be curious and be forever questing and searching is really important. If you want any further information on the qualification that we've been discussing, you can go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, look for CPCAB Special Edition episode, and that's sitting between episodes 353 and 354, and click the links in the show notes section. And of course, you can go to cpcab.co.uk and they will have all that information available for you. And it just remains for me to say, Liz Nicholl, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rory.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.